we moved from selling people to selling a product team. And so by the end, we really wanted our person to manage the team. We wanted to have a fairly material sort of set of accountability. We want to build part of your product and be accountable for it. We want to do the strategy, the design, and the development of it. And that became a real differentiator.
Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander. So today on the show, I'm very excited to welcome Mark Orttung. I really am excited about this episode because a lot of the times as agencies, we're always sort of debating about the best model and where to specialize and how to grow what we're building. And I think right now we're in this really unique time where the agency model is one that can be more malleable and kind of adjust to where the rest of the world is going. And Mark, I think you've been very successful doing that. And I'd love to kind of bring this to you. So would you mind talking a little bit about your background and how you got here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here. I've bounced in my career between services companies and product companies. So I've got a bit of an unusual background. Started my career at Accenture, doing a bunch of unusual things. I helped them build out the methodology for all of Accenture through a software product. I got a chance to go get a master's in AI back in the 90s, which was a pretty interesting experience. At the time, I decided it wasn't ready for prime time. So I spent about 9 years in a whole bunch of different roles at Accenture, and then moved to, I kind of got the bug to go do software startups. So I did 4 software startups in a row across telecom, travel, corporate procurement. The last one was Bill.com, which is small business finance, and really enjoyed working with SMBs. It's just a great group of businesses. People are really passionate about what they do. And then I took a turn again, and I went back to running a services company. So I went to a company called Nexient, which when I took over was about 39 million. We grew it. Well, first thing we did over a couple of years is shrink it to about 34 million. I made a bunch of mistakes in the beginning, but we found a model and really were able to grow it to about 130 million. This was from 2014 to 2021. And then we sold it in 2021 to NTT Data. And then now I've gone back to the software world, putting my last 2 things together at a company called ProjectWorks, which creates a platform to run services companies for particularly SMB services companies.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to dig into the more contemporary parts of your resume. I have to do a sidebar though on studying AI in the 90s. What was that like? How much did you see all this stuff coming from back then?
Yeah, it was crazy. I worked in a lab in Northwestern University that was funded by Accenture, so became my full-time job. Um, there were 2 schools of thought at the time. There were people who were trying to encode all of the knowledge about the world, which is what we were doing. So like trying to teach the computer, this is a chair, chairs have legs, there's office chairs, there's, living room chairs, like build this whole world of knowledge. And then there was another camp that was doing pure statistics. And so the professors I worked with were like, that stuff will never work. Neural nets, nobody understands it. It's all math. It's not really understanding. And so I think that, the neural net side of the world, which has become generative AI, has clearly won. Although I think to get all the way to AGI, you probably have to go back and put the conceptual stuff back in. That would kill off some of the challenges like hallucination and other things. But at the time, none of this stuff worked on more than a very, very tight domain. And most of the researchers joke that if you had 3 examples, then you had succeeded. So like you could put 3 things in and it would do those 3 things. If you put a 4th thing in, it probably would get it wrong.
Yeah.
So I was always much more interested in application of technology than sort of pure research. And so for me, it wasn't that interesting yet. I didn't feel like you could really apply it in the real world to sort of business problems. So that's why at least back in the 90s, I was like, this isn't ready. And I kind of went off and did a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, and it sounds like that was the right move, assuming you wanted to build companies at that time. So that all makes sense. Bringing it to Nexient, so can you go back to that experience again? So I'm sorry, were you founding the company from the beginning, or did you come in later after it was founded?
No, I came in 5 years in. So a friend of mine, Neeraj Gupta, had founded it. He had also founded a venture fund with a colleague of his, Servant Ventures, is the name of the fund. And around year five, both were doing well enough that the investors in the fund said, "We're in if you are. Like, you can't have this, you can't be running a company and running this fund." So he needed to find somebody to come in and run what at the time was called Systems in Motion. So I took over Systems in Motion in 2014, at the very end of 2014. And it was running at about 39 million. And so 0 to 39 million in 5 years, which was pretty amazing. Almost all of that flowed through Niraj. He was really fantastic, but also had one. I think I learned later there's this sort of a wall that you hit in consulting firms, where I think in the beginning maybe the founder's doing pretty much everything. Then the founder hires a team of people that work for him, that help him sell, help him deliver, but still all the decisions flow through the founder, and that's sort of where Systems in Motion was when I found it. And so I stepped into the seat and everything was coming to me. And I was used to scaling companies and having a more decentralized model. So it didn't really make sense to me that I should be in the middle of everything. Literally, if a proposal went out, Niraj would have to review it before it went. He would call out all kinds of stuff. And it was always better after he looked at it. But I was like, I can't look at everything this company does. I think it's just not my style and my approach. But in trying to figure out how to change the style, it took quite a while. We changed the team, and we made a whole bunch of mistakes on our go-to-market and on managing clients. So every once in a while, we would have we had a 50-person engagement unexpectedly just end. And so I don't know if you've ever gotten that email. We had probably at the time 200, 250 billable people. So you get 50 people that you thought were billable for the rest of the year coming back to your bench in a week. It's just like, oh, that was pretty rough.
Yeah, I think I was just gonna say we've been through that, and lots of people listening have too. Just for some real quick background information, can you say, and apologies if you mentioned what was the product or the service at this stage, and who you're selling it to at Nexient?
Yeah, so at this stage, it was pure engineering. So developing software for Fortune 500 and large enterprise companies. We were early on in Agile, and we were 100% in the US. So all of the engineers sat in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So at the time in 2014, Agile was still not that widely adopted, particularly in corporate America. And so that was a differentiator, and being US was pretty unusual. Most of IT had moved offshore to India or other lower cost places. So having a small part of your Fortune 500 portfolio in the US was actually differentiated and kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But I had an advisor join and go talk to my customers who said really they bought because we were cheap and because we had good people. And so I kind of realized that we were not that differentiated and we needed to do something to differentiate the offering going forward.
Yeah, I want to dig into that and to tee it off a little bit. I think like the lines right now have gone really blurry between what an agency is versus what a consulting model is. And I think the line between planning the thing that somebody should do and then actually doing it is also getting very blurry with AI, or just with, even before AI with an outsourced or a globalized workforce and all that good stuff. So with that, can you get into kind of how you were thinking about this product model versus the way other consultancies or agencies might be doing it?
Yeah, and I think this was partly just because my own experience coming, out of the software world, that was just how I thought about it, was in software, small teams of 5 to 10 people that had a product management person, a designer, a UX person, and then some really strong engineers could get a lot done. And so there was this sort of triumvirate of product, design, and engineering that if you got those three people working as peers, a lot of magic happened. So the idea was we could differentiate our engineering firm by creating a product management practice and creating a design practice. And that would then create these small product teams. And ultimately, it took us a long time to articulate it, but we moved from selling people to selling a product team. And so by the end, we really wanted our person to manage the team. We wanted to have a fairly material sort of set of accountability. We want to build part of your product and be accountable for it. We want to do the strategy, the design, and the development of it. And that became a real differentiator. A lot of the even it was wild to me having coming back into consulting. A lot of our clients would say if we hire a big global firm and they do the design and they do the build, there's still this giant handoff that the people who work on the design and the strategy are not involved in the build. And coming out of the startup world and out of the product world, I thought one of our strengths was you get these really smart people working on the design and the strategy, and then you build it and then you run it. And all the things you thought were going to happen don't happen. And, but you own it. And so you just stay after it as a small team, and your designs get better and your strategy gets better because you're getting all this really good feedback from building and operating it. And I thought that model would make more sense. And it turned out to be a real differentiator, at least in the Fortune 500 tech clients, that most of the vendors they worked with were either design or build, but very few sort of had that same group of people all the way through.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like, it's funny. I was reading, I think it was sort of like the Charlie Munger Almanac or something, and it was like simplicity is the outcome. It's the thing that you get to after trying everything else. And then there's a lot of business books or whatever that they sort of like imply like, oh, just keep it simple. And it's like, no, so you have to arrive at simplicity. There's a journey.
Yeah.
So can you talk about, assuming you agree with that, can you talk about that a little bit? What were some of those mistakes? Like, what did the iteration look like to get to that thing that you described?
Yeah, I mean, in the very beginning when I joined, if you looked at our website, our 200-person firm looked like we could solve any problem that an enterprise had. Like it was sort of, it was like this fishing net. Like it just listed problems. And I was like, how on earth could we possibly be good at solving all these different things if there's only 200 of us? And um, so we tried to really dial it in. And we were inspired by the Simon Sinek, sort of why are you here question. It's pretty well known. And just kept staying after that. And we got down to, we want to help firms build software that people love to use. And we wrote it out as a mission statement in a typically sort of boring way. And then we put in this parenthetical thing that said, because life's too short for crappy software. And that kind of became the rallying cry, first for our employees. And then we started trying it as the first slide in our pitch and the homepage of our website. And it just became this sort of focusing idea that there's all this bad software in thermostats, in stoves, in cars, all these places that aren't necessarily software products, but are now mostly software. And that we could help bring this idea of strategy, design, and engineering together to build really great software, no matter what the context was. And so we decided it was kind of scary, to be honest, to get rid of the we'll help you with anything and just say, we're going to do this one thing. And we would say no to a lot of potential engagements. People would come to us and say, can you do a SharePoint rollout? Or can you help us put a little design on top of our SharePoint? And we probably could, and we could make some revenue, but we decided we're going to get really focused on this one thing. So we would start saying no to those things, which in the beginning was really hard. But as it got going and as we got more and more engagements purely focused on this kind of product focused software development, it really began to grow. And by maybe 2017, we were growing about 40% a year. And so we were growing, we had bottomed out at about 34 million in revenue. We started about 39. And then we started growing 40% a year. We did that for about 5 years and got it to 130 million. And so it was quite a machine once it got going, but it was pretty terrifying in the beginning, just, saying no to a lot
Yeah.
of things.
I can imagine. And one thing that I think is uniquely challenging or frustrating about B2B is like you don't have this fire hose of data at all times. It's kind of like a trickle, and you have like this salesperson had this experience on this call, and this other person had this other experience, and this person bought over here, this other person said no for these reasons. And basically it's the classic getting signal from the noise kind of problem. Assuming that you experienced that, can you talk about what that was like? And to bring this to a question, how did you know that this thing was working that you've iterated on?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, it was a bit of a shock coming. So at Bill.com, it was a, going after small SMBs, almost like a B2C play. So it was all digital, all inbound funnel to our website, product led growth, trying to convert. And then I went into Nexient, and we didn't have any leads coming from our website, literally nothing digital. This was 2014, 2016, 2018. People in the enterprise at that point, you really had to sell through relationships. So a lot of events, dinners, kind of in-person marketing, working our networks, working referrals. And so, yeah, there was not a lot of data at all. It was really, we had at the peak 50 clients. So sort of the numbers weren't massive either, whereas at Bill.com, when I left, I think we had 20 or 30,000 customers. And, it just, the amount of data you get in that kind of world is so much more than here. We ended up just building it in that, and I'm not sure if that world still exists or not. Maybe today in the enterprise world, it is all digital, and people are much more looking for their vendors online and through more digital channels. But at least in this time period, they weren't. So we had to, we did a lot of sort of what I would call testing. Literally, it was expensive because we would get a customer or a prospective customer interested in the firm, and then we'd run our whole pitch and we would experiment with it. So in a way, we're sort of A/B testing it, but the number is so low, you really have to like listen and hear the feedback. But it was expensive to get each meeting and run those tests. But we just kept
Yeah.
evolving it over time.
And you kind of have to use a combination of, I've heard somebody say this exact same phrase 3 times in the last 2 weeks. That's probably means something. And then,
Yeah.
a little bit of gut feeling, a little bit of talking to people in the company and so on. So that all
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. Sorry, were you to say something?
Well, the other thing we did is we started out doing these. We were based in the Bay Area, so we started out having customers come out to the Bay Area. We'd have them meet a bunch of startups, and then we'd share our content. And then we decided to try doing that with multiple clients at once. So we sort of ended up creating our own conference. And that became a really good experimentation place for us to try out our new positioning for the firm. So we could gather a number of prospective clients and actual clients together in person. And in the beginning, probably the first year we did it, we had maybe 10 companies represented, and we were excited to get to 10 because when you come up with these ideas, you're not sure if anyone's going to come. And by the end, we probably peaked at over 100 companies coming to this thing. And so that was for us a way to get a much bigger audience together and get a lot of feedback on where we were pushing our positioning as a company. And in the beginning, we sort of said, we're thinking of doing this thing where we get product management, design, and engineering together. Would anybody be interested in that? And everybody in the room said, we're already trying to figure that out because we know that the startups are going to eat our lunch and we know that's how they work. So if you can figure that out and sell it to us, we're in, right? So that was really kind of a nice affirmation of the idea. And then every 6 to 12 months, we get this group back together again. And we were able to kind of take our next generation or our next iteration and get the feedback. And they would help us iterate it as well. So that I think was the closest you could get to like really good feedback loop to a larger group.
Yeah. And that's super interesting. I think you guys were probably ahead of the curve there. And like whether it's our clients or just other agencies that we admire out there, that's what I think a lot of the better players are doing that have like specialized is we've seen people set up awards organizations or set up their own conferences, podcasts like we're doing right now, interview series, whatever it is to sort of open up the conversation and build the relationship around solving a problem, as opposed to like the normal transactional sales scenario, which is, hey, I'm selling this thing. Do you have a need for this thing? No, then I'm going to follow up with you until you have the need, right?
Yeah.
Never really builds the relationship or the trust that's necessary. Just to dig into that a little bit more. So you were getting like different, like all the clients you were working with and others, like everybody in the same room, it sounds like.
Yeah, they were wildly different industries. We had somebody who ran
Yeah.
one of the largest healthcare organizations. We had people from like a gas and electric utility sitting next to people from tech companies. And they really liked that actually, because they were all working on similar problems in totally different domains. And yet there was a lot they could share. So I think half the value of this thing was we would always do it in wine country, it'd be a couple days. So there'd be like dinners and evenings, and people could just network with these were mostly CIOs or people that work directly for CIOs. And so they had pretty interesting perspectives, and it was just a great crowd.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to get into what you're doing with Project Works in a bit. I have a few more questions kind of on building Nexient and other companies. Um, the first one that I have, because I think that there's a lot of agencies listening, and a lot of them are in the process of specializing or hand-wringing about how they should specialize. And there's a lot of people specializing by vertical, so going narrower, but maybe a little bit wider with services. And it sounds like with Nexient, you were specializing horizontally, so you had the service, but for a lot of large companies of different
Hmm.
verticals and so on. You're working with a lot of consultancies now with Project Works. How viable do you think specializing by services now? Because it seems like there's a lot more competition and skepticism, a lot more people saying, I do X, a lot more ways to get that. If you were building Nexia now, do you think you'd be able to build it the same way? Or if not, how would it be different? If that question makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I do think it's possible to specialize by a service. I kind of loosely based my career on the technology adoption curve. I think it was originally Jeffrey Moore and this idea of early adopters and crossing the chasm and mainstream. And so at Nexient, I felt like, again, that sort of product of thinking around the service we offered. At the time, there were a lot of software outsourcers. There were very few, if almost no, product outsourcers. So the idea being that you could do, today you probably could find lots of them, that you could hire a whole team that has product design and engineering. But at the time, that was, I would say, in the early adopter phase as a market. And around 2017, when we started to do it, we only knew of two or three others that were looking at it. And by 2020, I'd say Gartner had written a paper that said this is what everyone is doing. And so it went pretty quickly. So I've worked with other firms very directly and said, okay, you got to figure out what's in that early adopter part of the curve today. What solution, So I worked with a firm 3 or 4 years ago and kind of gave them that advice. They decided it was Gen AI 3 or 4 years ago. It was a good bet, right? So they got in early. They kind of built services around it, built some IP in the Gen AI category, and now are one of they're really doing well because that's a specialized service that they have developed, and they've got some very specific applications of it because it's obviously a pretty broad topic. So I would actually say to firms, you need to look at that adoption curve, like where are the markets, and is there a specialty that's in the early adopter phase that you believe as a market's going to take off and that the mainstream buyers are going to want to buy. Um, and it could be almost anything. For example, we at Project Works, we have a customer who is a boutique management consultancy. So most of our customers are between 20 and 100, 20 and 500 employees. So relatively small to mid-market companies. So when you get a 50-person management consultancy, it doesn't look like McKinsey or the classic ones. It's 50 people who, in this case, know how to apply leading edge technology to insurance underwriting. And they've got a group of people who've done that dozens of times each. And so if you're a large insurance company and you want to update your underwriting process, you call these people. And they've just, they've kind of, I'm sure they've probably gone through multiple waves of technology going into that market, and they just keep reinventing themselves to the latest. And I'm sure today is Gen AI going into your underwriting, and there's probably going to be more and more flavors of that. So whatever niche you're in, I think you got to figure out where's the market and how can I get on the next wave? Because I think these services firms, you kind of ride waves. One of the things that I think I learned at Accenture that was most valuable was they reinvent themselves every 2 to 3 years. If you look at what that company has been, it's been the leader for decades, but every 2 or 3 years, it's a wildly different company, and that the leadership constantly challenges themselves, like where is the market going to be in 2 or 3 years, and how do I make sure I get there and stay in the lead? So I think as a small agency, you got to pick the next wave, place a bet, hopefully you get on it and it crosses the chasm and gets into the mainstream. And I feel like we got lucky at Nexient to pick this idea of product oriented solution delivery, and that became what the market was looking for. But it also has a downside, right? That curve goes back down. So you gotta ride it and either reinvent yourself as you get to the peak and find the next one, or in our case, we sold the firm because we had gotten to about 1,100 people, and I could tell that there were two things happening. One, we were going to hit the next wall, so we hit a wall at about 30 million, 35 million, where we had to rebuild the company into a much more decentralized management structure. And I could tell there was another wall somewhere around 150 million. And I was going to have to reorganize the company again. And I didn't know into what. Like, I'm not sure what's beyond that wall, but I could tell there was one coming. And also that we were nearing the top of our curve. So it was sort of, we would either need to reinvent what we were doing and find the next wave and rebuild our organization again. And that's kind of what I went through from 39 million to 34 million, was rebuilding what we focused on and rebuilding how we operated as a company. And I didn't have the energy at that point to do all of that again and risk all the revenue we had, right? Because it's one thing when you're a relatively small firm and you're sort of gambling on these things and iterating. As you get bigger and bigger, it's just higher stakes to try to reinvent and reconfigure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that I like that you're talking about thinking in terms of these bets and more like a startup, more like a product focused company. And I think that's where every business has to be thinking like that to some extent, especially agencies. Um, I think to bring this to a question, I guess I'm wondering, like, is there anything that you wish you knew then about building a company focusing on early adopters? Are there challenges that you hadn't anticipated?
One of the things that we learned over the time there that became really helpful was to think about sort of the behavioral aspects of the persona of our buyer. So we got better and better at figuring out what a change agent inside of a large organization look like, and sort of how to identify them from their behaviors and from other things. And we found that we succeeded best when we could identify one of these people, build a great relationship with them, really understand what their goals were and how they got their bonus and what they were signed up for. And if we could help them do that, they would actually, we had one guy at large retailer say it out loud. Most of them didn't say it, but he was like, I'm going to give you one test project, and if it goes well, I will introduce you to all of my peers across this, Fortune 50 company. And if it doesn't go well, I'll make sure you never work here again. And that was like generally how we would get in. We would find one of these kind of slightly crazy change agent type people inside a large organization, and they would give us one test project. Usually somewhere along the way, they would say, by the way, two other firms tried this project previously and they both failed. Like, they wouldn't tell us that until later. But yeah, and so I wish I had known early on, like, how to identify who is my real buyer inside and how to identify them, how to know if I've got a good fit, and then how to approach them and how to make the business go.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, what did that look like, that change agent?
Yeah, they were. It was interesting because in most large companies, you are not rewarded for raising your hand and taking on risk, right? That most of these Fortune 100, 500, you should just not take any risk and you kind of just keep going up. And they would stand out as somebody you could find them. They often were out speaking at conferences, they were out networking more, and you could tell they were very interested in change. They would often have some kind of a title related to, at the time, digital transformation was kind of the big thing. So a lot of them were in that sort of part of the organization. My guess is today they're all like the AI officer or I don't know what the exact title would be, but you can find them in the AI part of the organization. They're the ones that were willing to take a little bit of a risk and are willing to, because if they do a large transformational project inside the company and bet on you and your firm, they're effectively betting their career in that company on you and your firm. So you got to really build trust and really build the confidence with them that they're going to make the right bet. And if it goes well, they're going to probably get a big promotion. They're going to get a bigger kind of portfolio within the company. But there's also a lot of risk in it for them as well.
I'm really glad you brought that up because a lot of the times we're working with agencies on outbound, improving these sales efforts, and occasionally we'll run into people that are like, I just need to get in front of more people, need more at bats, and then I'm gonna put what we do in front of them, and if there's a need, then they'll buy from us. I'm like, you don't understand, like these people are wagering everything on you. Like they're hiring the agency they met a year ago or 2 years ago or whatever. So like, yeah, how do you meet more? How do you meet more of these people? Don't forget about closing their business right away. So it sounds like you
Yeah.
guys were ahead of that. And to bring that to a question, I guess, how does your sales cycles play out? So you're having these conferences, like how long does it take to actually get deals signed?
It would take, well, early on, before we were proven, it would take 18 months to get a new client. And you get a non-disclosure, and then you'd have to sign the master services agreement and these giant companies. And that could be, they send you off to procurement. One of them, I remember the master services agreement was 90 pages. So like literally every time we would have a call to go through it, it was like 3 hours just because it was 90, it was just crazy. Um, so it takes forever. As we got, um, that was one of the things we applied our sort of agile software development to everything we did. And so we looked at sales cycles and time to revenue and time to scale. We wanted to build clients where we could bill 5 million a year, and then we got into where we wanted to have some clients where we could bill 10 million a year. So we would measure cycle time to get into 5 million and cycle time to get into 10 million. And in the early years, it was probably 4 or 5 years to get a $5 million client where it was consistently at that level. And by the end of the 5 year growth, we had some clients that in year one would hit 5 million and in year two would hit 10 million. So we took a lot of little steps that we learned along the way. Um, and also I think they would give us a little more benefit of the doubt because we could show them enough case studies in other organizations where we had done a similar project and could deliver it. In the beginning, we were just trying to convince them, that we were good people and that we were going to do a good job. And so normally you'd have to take on much smaller projects and prove yourself, and really get into the system and get into their group and their culture, build the trust, and then you'd slowly, incrementally get bigger and bigger responsibility.
And it sounds like it also helped that because you're at the beginning, early adopter phase of crossing the chasm for what you did, it wasn't like there were five other options for them to choose from. It's like if they want this problem solved, keep doing it the old way or give us a shot. It was also the BATNA basically.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So with that, it sounds like I forgot the number that you gave in terms of employees, but it sounds like you got this up to maybe it was 1,000 employees
Yeah.
and
So
so on. And you mentioned it's
the end.
1,100, and you sort of ran into these different walls, these different phases. Can you talk more about that? Like, what do those phases look like? Are those the ones that people talk about a lot, or do you have a bone to pick with the way that people talk about the phases of business growth and so on?
Yeah. So I think there's a founder does everything phase, so maybe 0 to 50 employees, something like that, where the founder needs to be involved in sales, needs to be doing most things, but then they also need to stop at some point. They need to bring on other people that can help with these things. So there's a wall somewhere around 5 million in revenue, something like that, where you move from founder doing everything to founder plus a team. So then that I think scales to somewhere between 25 and 40 million. And I've talked to a lot of CEOs of services firms that have bounced between 20 million and 35 million and gone back to 20 million and up, and they don't understand why they are stuck in this loop and they can't get past 35, 40 million. And I think it really is having to break down their organization into these decentralized groups. So what I ended up doing, we were stuck in that range. I ended up breaking the country into 5 regions geographically and hiring very senior people to run each of the regions. So effectively, these people were talented enough that they could effectively run their own consulting company. So where if you think like the founder-led leadership team gets stuck at, call it 30, 40 million, then if I could have 5 of these people, then I could have 5 times 30 or 40 million was my theory, right? Like that. So now we could get to like 150 million with this structure. And it worked. They could build in each region a business of 20 to 30 million. And that's what got us to 130 million. But I could also tell that they were reaching their limits toward the end of it. And so we probably could have said, okay, instead of 5 regions, we're going to have 8. And that would buy us a little bit more. But somewhere we're going to have to fundamentally change it again. And that's what I'm saying. There's like another wall there where you've kind of given these different groups their own responsibility and they can scale to a certain level. And then that breaks. And so now what? And that was part of the question I was looking at when we decided to sell. So I don't know what's on the other side of that wall, but I'm pretty confident there's a wall somewhere around 150 million, maybe 200 million, where you got to rebuild again into some other more decentralized units that can scale past that 40 million per year.
That's interesting. And I guess what made you decide to sell instead of trying to get through that next wall?
Yeah, I think it was a few things. One, I thought our product centric outsourcing was somewhere in the mainstream, and I didn't know exactly what, but like, so some of the things I looked for was when do the large, like the giant firms, start buying all the small firms who do this, and a number of acquisitions had happened. So now instead of me competing with 3 or 4 smaller firms nobody's ever heard of, now I compete with the largest firms in the world that just bought one of my competitors and is pouring lots of money into this. So I felt like it's becoming mainstream, and it wasn't clear to me how I was going to compete in that game. That was one. 2 is this problem with the scaling. 3 was we hadn't had a recession in like 10 years, and it just seemed like we were going to. Like, I didn't know if it was going to be in 1 year or 4 years, but it just felt like, you know, you don't want running a services firm through a recession is a very challenging thing. And given the growth rate we have and sort of the scale we had, it would have been really hard. You could do it, but it would. And then there was a bit of a bubble at that time. This was 2021, so there was a lot of, you know, cheap cash, a lot of cash flowing. The multiples for acquisitions were above what they normally are pretty significantly. So it felt like we could get a price in 2021, or we could gamble on trying to double the firm, maybe have to do that through a recession. And even then, maybe not get more than 1.25 times what we're getting now. And there's a lot of risk that we wouldn't double the firm, like, you know, just so all those things came together. And also I was a little bit burnt out. Running a services firm for 7 years takes a toll on you. And so I was, all of that came together, and it just seemed like a great moment.
Yeah,
To test the market.
that makes sense. Sorry to me cut you off. I was just going to say, I guess how did that deal come about? Were you already in touch with NTT, or was it happenstance, or did you out there?
Yeah, so I actually, I was pretty convinced that the market was in a really good place to sell. My board didn't necessarily agree with me, so I actually had some inbound interest from a different firm, and I worked with them to get a term sheet that sort of put a price on what we could get, and took that to my board, and then they got very interested. Kind of a long story, but this company then we tried to negotiate it up a little bit. And we were within like 1 or 2% of a deal we would have taken. And the other firm just went radio silent on me, just stopped answering. And I had this sort of principle when I was negotiating with Corp Dev that I would not nag people. So if they send me an email, I'd send an email back. If I sent them an email and they didn't reply, I did. Like, normally in selling, I would like bump it to the top of their inbox or whatever. But in this, I just felt like you want to look like you don't want to sell. So a week goes by, nothing, crickets. And so my board hired a banker and said, if that's what the market's at, we should get a banker. And so 3 weeks goes by before I hear back from this original firm with the term sheet. It turns out they had a really large client go sideways, north of $100 million problem on one engagement. They're a publicly traded company. They went and they did their earnings, and they said, we had this big problem. We're going to write it off. Part of how we're going to fix it is we're going to do M&A. And then 4 hours later, I get an email from my contact there and saying, okay, we're ready to go. We want to move forward. By this point, we had hired a banker, built a management deck, and they had signed up like 12 other firms who were interested. So I had to go back to these guys and say, all this happened. I'd like to introduce you to my banker. They were really unhappy with me. They're really, really mad because they thought we had a deal. But I was like, you just, went dark on me. So then we had a process with 12 interested parties, and NTT kind of floated to the top as the best fit, and just a really good kind of cultural fit for us. So, yeah, it was a bit of a winding path to get there, but it worked out well because there was enough interest in the market that we could get multiple bids and really figure out what the company was worth. And it ended up being worth probably another 25% more than that first term sheet I had gotten. So getting anchors actually raised the value even more.
Yeah, that's great. And that must have been a roller coaster. With the time we have left, I definitely want to get into project work. So I guess you sell the company. What inspired project works, and what was the journey to get there?
Yeah, so when I was at Nexient, we needed a platform to run the firm. And probably the most central challenge we had was resourcing, and really like, how do you hire as fast as you sell and like try to keep new sales and hiring in balance, and don't have too big a bench and don't have too long a wait to start new projects. And so you're like almost never perfectly in balance. So we tried three of the different systems in the market, hated all of them, dumped them each after a year. In year 4, we just started building our own because we were a bunch of software nerds. So we built our own in-house system. We called it Nexport. Started as a shared spreadsheet. Then one of our engineers built like a JavaScript front end on the web. And then like one day we like moved it to a real database, and it just became this system. But we really understaffed it. We would just put people on between projects. But then as soon as we got a great client project, we'd rip them out of working on Nexport and put them on the next client project because it was billable. So that the team that worked on Nexport looked like every 4 weeks you got all new developers and designers and product people. And it just wasn't a great way to build product. So fast forward through an investor, I met the ProjectWorks founders, Matt and Doug, 2 of the 3 founders. And I just really liked them, and I really liked the product they had. They were building this platform to run SMB services companies. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, if I had had this at Nexient, it could have like saved me so much grief. So I started out by just asking if I could join their board. And so I was on the board. I've been on the board for about 3 years. And I was still at the time doing a role at NTT. I took on merging a bunch of their acquisitions into a new group called Launch by NTT Data. And so I was doing that for a couple of years. And then at that time, I just joined the board. And then as I left NTT, it just kind of worked out. We lost our product at ProjectWorks. We lost our product lead. And so Matt, who was running the company, had a choice to either he could hire one or he could potentially go into that role. He has a lot of passion for product and engineering. And around that time, the investors were asking me if I wanted to come aboard full time. And so I chatted with Matt and the other founders, and it just was a good time and a good fit. So I came aboard as CEO, and it put together 2 things which I thought were completely unrelated: my Bill.com experience with SMB finance and my running of a services firm. But this is kind of, similar architecture, similar go-to-market as Bill.com. And then at Nexient, effectively, I was a customer, or, doing customer research for 9 years on the pains of running and growing a firm. And so I think one of the things I'm really proud about at ProjectWorks is we have over 150 years of combined experience running or working in services firms. So it's a very bespoke platform for services firms, specifically consulting firms that work on a project basis, and design agencies are a great fit for it. And it's just, you can kind of tell the core of it is really around managing your resources and managing your project financials and getting a real-time view of whether your project's going to be profitable, and while you can still do something about it before it's too late. And then also managing who's working on what, who's billable, what's your utilization rate, and where's that. At Nexient, I always had this cliff where if you looked a number of weeks out, we were all booked up, and then somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks out, we weren't booked up. And so, it was always this slightly terrifying thing. Usually it's always 4 weeks out, but you're constantly selling, constantly trying to get new projects. And so ProjectWorks has this really fantastic tool for managing that balance and that resource kind of management. And then it does all the other kind of source of truth things. It does time cards, expense reporting, vacation management. And then from there, you can raise really detailed invoices, sync them over to your accounting system, and it syncs in with your CRM. So Salesforce or HubSpot kind of pulls it all together. Most of the companies we work with are running on spreadsheets, and maybe they have a time tracking tool. So something like a Harvest or one of the competitors of Harvest. And we can usually get rid of most of their spreadsheets and that time tracking tool and give them a platform with a lot more intelligence about what's happening in their business. So now they know which clients are profitable, which projects are profitable, more importantly, which ones are off track before they wrap up, and really just helps you run the firm.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That was going to be my next question, is kind of how to slot that into the rainforest of operational tools a lot of these agencies are using. So
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
it becomes for SMB firm, it becomes sort of the main platform for running the business. Not for the design or the task management. Those tools are still going to be there, but we become sort of the main operational back-end platform.
Yeah, and maybe you answered this with what you just said, but I guess like where for the competing tools, where do you kind of see this differentiating itself, and what were some of those the main itch you were looking to scratch, I guess, when you were getting involved in this
Yeah,
and the founders of building it?
I think the differentiation comes down to the ability to manage resourcing and that sort of balance between selling and staffing, and the ability to really get real-time, forward-looking information about your business. A lot of times you get, like at Nexient, at the month end, maybe a week and a half later, my finance team would tell me what happened, but it was always too late to do anything about it. And what I really wanted was a tool that would tell me what's going to happen next month, not what happened last month. And so I think that's the differentiator for ProjectWorks, is it's real-time intelligence about your projects, about your staffing, about your teams, and it gives you a chance to do something about it while you still can. And that, that just I think is key for a lot of the tools are focused in on one of the tactical tasks, timekeeping or whatever it may be, but they're not giving you that kind of complete view that across the firm.
Yeah, and it seems like that's kind of a recurring theme with lots of softwares. There's kind of this like over indexing on historic data, which can be limitedly valuable versus at least some short term forecasting. Maybe not to the end of time, but at least the next few months or whatever it is. Yeah. So Mark, this has been awesome. As the last question, what are you excited about? What are you working on over the next few months that you might want to talk about?
Yeah, we're excited about expanding our product into the growth side. So today we're really about operating your firm, and we're getting into the biggest challenge I had in Nexient was always selling more work and growing the firm. And so we're going to build tools on that side, and it's a really natural fit for large language models and AI to really apply to helping you. You can imagine write proposals, know about who your team is, how to match them to different problem statements. And so we're really excited. We've already got a bunch of stuff in the development shop that we're building and working with customers to shape. And into this quarter, we'll start having some early access to it. And into next quarter, we'll probably have the product out. And so, yeah, really fun stuff. And I think really will align with where a lot of people spend much of their time in firm leadership, is trying to find new customers and that whole growth side of the business. So yeah.
Very cool. And where can people go to follow ProjectWorks and everything you're up to?
Yeah, projectworks.com. And then you find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the best place. Pretty easy to find. Not a lot of people named Orttung out there. So if you can spell it, then you can find me.
Two T's.
Two T's, exactly.
Very good. Mark, this has been a blast. Hopefully we'll get a chance to do it again. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.